I was reading the newspaper this morning here in Omaha, and something caught my eye. SpaceX announced they're lowering the orbit of 4,400 satellites. Now, most people saw that headline and thought, well, that's a technical thing. Some space company doing space stuff. Nothing to do with me. But I sat back in my chair and I thought, this is bigger than most people realize. Much bigger. Because what's happening up there in space right now, it's not just about satellites. It's about the next great infrastructure build of our lifetime. And if you understand what's really going on, if you can see past the headlines, there's enormous wealth to be built here. Enormous. I'm 94 years old. I've lived through the railroad boom, the highway system, the internet build-out, all the great infrastructure revolutions of modern America. And I can tell you, what I'm seeing in space right now, it is all the hallmarks of those early days. The same patterns, the same opportunities, the same way that patient capital gets rewarded massively over time. But you've got to know where to look. You got to understand what this satellite news really means. So let me break it down for you, because this isn't just about SpaceX. This is about a fundamental shift in how the world works. Let's start with the announcement itself. SpaceX says they're lowering 4,400 satellites. The official reason is solar activity changes are making satellites take longer to naturally deorbit, so they're lowering them to speed up the process when they fail. Sounds reasonable, right? Safety first, avoid space debris, keep things clean up there. And I'm sure that's part of it. But here's what I've learned in 7 decades of investing. When a company makes a big technical move like this, there's almost always more to the story. Almost always a strategic reason underneath the official explanation. Think about it. Moving 4,400 satellites costs money. Real money. You don't do that just for appearances. You do it because it gives you a competitive advantage. And what advantage does a lower orbit give you? Faster internet speeds. Lower latency, better coverage. See, the closer those satellites are to Earth, the faster they can communicate. That's physics. You can't change that. So SpaceX is essentially upgrading their entire network by moving it closer to customers. That's brilliant. That's the kind of move I look for in businesses. A move that looks like one thing, but is actually something else entirely. A move that improves the product while everyone's focused on the PR story. But let me step back and talk about something bigger. The space economy. Because that's really what this is about. For most of my life, space was government stuff. NASA, the Pentagon, big budgets, slow moving, lots of waste. There was no real business model. No private companies can make money up there. But that's changed completely in the last 10 years. Completely. And most investors are still thinking about space the old way. They're missing what's right in front of them. SpaceX has launched over 6,000 satellites now. 6,000, and they're planning to launch thousands more. They've built a constellation that can provide internet to almost anywhere on Earth. Deserts, oceans, war zones, rural areas that traditional cable and fiber could never reach economically. That's a moat, a real competitive advantage. Once you've got 6,000 satellites up there and ground stations around the world and millions of customers, how does anyone compete with you? They have to spend billions just to catch up. And by the time they caught up, you'd be even further ahead. This is what I call a natural monopoly. Not the illegal kind, but the economic kind, where the first mover has such huge advantages in scale and network effects that competition becomes almost impossible. I made a lot of money over the years investing in businesses with natural monopolies. Railroads in the old days, utilities, certain technology platforms. And what I'm seeing in satellite internet right now, it has those same characteristics. Now, here's where it gets interesting for investors. You can't buy SpaceX stock directly. It's private. Elon's keeping it that way for now. But that doesn't mean you can't invest in this trend. You can. You just have to be smarter about it. You have to look at the ecosystem around space infrastructure, the suppliers, the customers, the enabling technologies. That's where the opportunities are hiding. Let me give you some examples. Who makes the satellites? Who makes the components? The radios, the solar panels, the thrusters? Who provides the launch services for companies that can't build their own rockets? Who builds the ground stations? Who provides the equipment for people to connect to these satellite networks? That's an entire supply chain. And that supply chain, it's growing fast. Real fast. Because it's not just SpaceX anymore. There's OneWeb out of the UK. Amazon's building Project Kuiper, their own satellite constellation. China's building multiple constellations. The European Space Agency is getting involved. Everybody sees the opportunity. Everybody wants a piece of this market. And when you've got that kind of competition, that kind of investment flowing into a sector, the suppliers get rich. The companies that make the shovels during a gold rush, they're the ones who make money consistently. So that's one angle. Satellite component manufacturers. Companies that make the actual hardware going into space. Now, I'm not going to tell you specific stocks to buy. I don't do that. That's not my style. And besides, you should do your own research, but I'll tell you what I'd be looking at. Companies with long-term contracts to supply components for these mega constellations. Companies with proprietary technology that's hard to replicate. Companies trading at reasonable valuations, not bubble prices. The second angle, and this one's even more interesting, is the data infrastructure on the ground. See, all those satellites, they're generating enormous amounts of data. Enormous. Images of Earth, communications traffic, GPS signals, all kinds of data. And that data has to be processed somewhere. It has to be stored, analyzed, distributed. That takes data centers, cloud computing, specialized software, AI to make sense of it all. So you've got this boom in space data that's driving demand for ground infrastructure. And the beautiful thing about infrastructure is once it's built, it generates cash flow for decades. I love infrastructure businesses. Always have. They're boring, predictable, essential. People need roads and bridges and power lines and data centers, whether the economy's good or bad, whether we're in a boom or a recession. Infrastructure just keeps working, keeps generating returns. And space data infrastructure is the same way. Once you've built the systems to process satellite data, you've got customers locked in. They're not going anywhere. They need your service. And you can charge them predictably, consistently, for years. Then there's a third angle, and this one most people aren't thinking about yet. Agriculture. Yeah, you heard me right. Agriculture. Here's why. Satellite data is revolutionizing farming. Farmers can now see exactly which parts of their fields need water, which parts need fertilizer, which parts have disease or pests. They can optimize everything down to the square meter. And this isn't theoretical. This is happening right now. Precision agriculture is a massive growing market. And the companies providing the satellite imagery, the AI analysis, the decision support systems, they're getting paid every season, every planting, every harvest. That's recurring revenue. That's the kind of business model I love. Sell a farmer a subscription to satellite data analysis, and they'll pay you year after year because it makes them more money. They can increase yields by 10%, 15%, sometimes 20% just by using better data. Why would they ever stop paying for that? So there's your third angle. Agricultural technology, companies using satellite data. And this extends beyond just farming. Forestry, mining, oil and gas, all these industries are using satellite data to improve operations, to find resources, to monitor environmental compliance, to optimize logistics. The applications are endless. Now let me talk about something else. National security. I don't usually get into politics or military stuff, but you can't ignore it when you're talking about space. Governments around the world are realizing that space infrastructure is critical to national security. Communication, navigation, surveillance, all of it depends on satellites now. And that means governments are going to spend money, lots of money, building their own systems, securing their own access to space. And when governments spend money on infrastructure, it's different from commercial spending. It's more stable, more predictable. Defense budgets don't disappear in recessions. In fact, they often go up. So companies with defense contracts related to space, satellite manufacturing, launch services, ground stations, cybersecurity for space systems, they got a very stable customer base. They've got Uncle Sam writing checks for decades. I've owned defense stocks before. Still do, actually. And one thing I appreciate about that business is the long-term visibility. When the Pentagon awards you a contract, it's often for 10 years, 15 years, sometimes longer. You know your revenue. You can plan. You can invest. And if you execute well, they keep renewing those contracts. That's a beautiful business model. All right, let me tell you about the risks because I always talk about risks. Nothing's a sure thing. Nothing. And space infrastructure has real risks you need to understand. First risk is technical failure. Satellites are complicated. They operate in a harsh environment. Radiation, extreme temperatures, micrometeorites, all kinds of things can go wrong. And when a satellite fails, it's not like you can send someone up to fix it easily. So companies in this space, pun intended, they need to build reliable systems. They need redundancy, and they need to price in failure rates. Second risk is regulatory. Governments control access to space. They control the electromagnetic spectrum that satellites use. They can change the rules anytime they want. And with so many satellites going up, you're seeing more and more regulatory pushback. Concerns about space debris, light pollution, interference with astronomy. SpaceX's announcement about lowering orbits, that's partly a response to regulatory pressure. They're trying to be proactive, show they're responsible. But regulations can still hurt these businesses. They can slow down deployments, increase costs, even shut down operations. Third risk is competition. Right now, we're in the early days of the space economy. But as it grows, as the profits become clear, you're going to get more competition. You're going to get well-funded competitors, including nation-states. And competition drives down prices. It reduces margins. That's great for consumers, not always great for investors. So you want to be invested in companies with real competitive advantages. Patents, scale, customer relationships, things that protect them from competition. Fourth risk, and this is the big one, is cost overruns. Space projects are notorious for going over budget. Way over budget. A satellite that was supposed to cost $200 million ends up costing $400 million. A launch system that was supposed to be operational in 3 years takes 7. This is an industry where things almost always cost more and take longer than planned. When you're evaluating companies in this space, you need to be conservative with your assumptions. Don't believe the rosy projections. Assume things will take longer and cost more. And if a company still makes sense under those assumptions, then maybe it's worth investing in. But here's the thing about risks. They're also what create opportunities. If this was easy, if there were no risks, everyone would be doing it. The returns would be average. But because it's hard, because it's risky, because it requires capital and expertise and patience, the companies that succeed can generate extraordinary returns. And that's what I'm always looking for. Difficult businesses that most people avoid, but that, if you understand them, can make you very wealthy. Let me tell you what I see when I look 10, 20 years out, that I see a world where where satellite internet is as common as cell phones, where rural areas in Africa and South America and Asia all have high-speed internet, where ships at sea and planes in flight all have connectivity, where cars are all connected, where IoT devices, Internet of Things, billions of them are all connected through satellite networks. That's trillions of dollars of economic activity. Trillions. And the companies providing that infrastructure, the companies making it possible, they're going to capture a lot of that value. I also see satellite data becoming essential to how we manage the planet. Monitoring climate change, tracking deforestation, managing water resources, predicting natural disasters. Governments and organizations will pay for that data because it helps them make better decisions. It helps them save money, save lives. And again, the companies providing that data and analysis, they're going to build very profitable businesses. Now, let me give you my investment framework for this sector because I think it's important to have a framework, not just chase hot stocks. First principle, focus on profitability, not growth at any cost. A lot of space companies are burning cash, promising profits someday. Maybe. I'm skeptical of those. I want to see companies that are already making money or have a clear path to profitability within a few years. SpaceX, for example. Starlink is reportedly profitable now or very close. That matters. That tells you the business model works. Second principle, look for recurring revenue. One-time satellite sales are fine, but I'd much rather invest in companies with subscription models or long-term service contracts. That gives you predictability. It gives you compounding as the customer base grows. SaaS models, software as a service, but for space data, those are attractive. Third principle, management matters. Space is hard. You need brilliant engineers, yes, but you also need disciplined managers who can control costs, meet deadlines, keep customers happy. I've seen too many space companies run by dreamers who can't execute. I want operators, people who've done this before, people with a track record. Fourth principle, reasonable valuation that I don't care how exciting a company is. If it's trading at 100 times revenue, I'm not interested. I want to pay a fair price, ideally a cheap price. Because even a great business is a bad investment if you pay too much. So I'm looking for companies that the market hasn't fully recognized yet. Companies that are flying under the radar. That's where you make the best returns. And fifth principle, long-term horizon. This is not a trade. This is not something you buy and sell in 6 months. Space infrastructure is a 10, 20, 30-year build-out. You need patience. You need to be able to ride through the volatility, through the setbacks, through the market cycles. But if you can do that, if you can hold quality companies for the long term, the returns should be excellent. You know, I think back to the early days of the internet. Late 1990s, everyone was excited about dot-com stocks. Most of them went to zero. Most of them were garbage companies with no real business model. But underneath all that hype, there was a real revolution happening. The internet was going to change everything. It just took longer than people thought. And the companies that survived, the companies with real business models, Amazon, Google, they created enormous wealth for their shareholders. I think space is similar. There's a lot of hype right now that a lot of companies that won't make it. A lot of money that's going to be lost. But underneath the hype, there's a real transformation happening. Space is becoming commercialized. It's becoming accessible. It's becoming an integral part of the global economy. And the companies that execute well, that build real businesses with real profits, they're going to create enormous wealth. So when I see SpaceX moving 4,400 satellites, I don't just see a technical operation. I see a company optimizing its network. I see a company with a massive lead in satellite internet. And I see an entire ecosystem of suppliers, partners, and enabling technologies that are going to benefit from this build out. That's the opportunity, not necessarily SpaceX itself, but the ecosystem around it. Now, let me talk about something I haven't mentioned yet, the geopolitical angle. Because space is becoming contested. China's building constellations. Russia's got systems. Europe's investing heavily. And the United States doesn't want to fall behind. There's a space race happening right now. It's not as dramatic as the 1960s moon race, but it's real. And it's driven by economic and military concerns. Countries that control space infrastructure, they have advantages in communication, navigation, intelligence gathering, all kinds of strategic areas. SO governments are going to keep funding this sector. They're going to keep supporting domestic companies. And for investors, that means there's a floor under the market. Even if commercial demand disappoints, even if the business case takes longer to develop, governments will keep writing checks because they have to. They can't afford not to. That's different from a purely commercial market. In a purely commercial market, if demand doesn't materialize, companies fail. But in space, you've got this dual customer base, commercial and government. And that makes it more resilient, more stable, which is exactly what I like as an investor, that I want stable, resilient businesses that can survive different scenarios. All right, let me bring this together. SpaceX's announcement about lowering satellite orbits, it's a symptom of a much bigger trend, the commercialization of space, the build out of space infrastructure. And this trend is going to create enormous investment opportunities over the next few decades. Not get-rich-quick opportunities, not lottery tickets, but solid, wealth-building opportunities in companies providing the picks and shovels for this new economy. If you want to position yourself, here's what I'd recommend. Do your homework. Study the space sector. Understand the technology, the economics, the competitive landscape. Don't just buy something because it sounds exciting. Understand what you're buying. Then, build a diversified portfolio of space-related investments. Not just one stock, but maybe 5 or 10 across different parts of the value chain. Satellite manufacturers, launch providers, data analytics companies, ground infrastructure, defense contractors. Diversify your exposure. Invest for the long term. Don't check the stock price every day. Don't panic when there's volatility. Remember, this is a multi-decade build-out. There will be ups and downs. But if you own quality companies and you hold them, you should do very well. And finally, keep your position size reasonable. I love space opportunities, but I wouldn't put my entire portfolio into it. Maybe 10%, maybe 15% for aggressive investors. But not everything. You still want diversification across sectors because who knows? I could be wrong about some of this. You know, at 94, I've learned to be humble about predictions. I've been wrong plenty of times. But I've also learned to recognize big trends when I see them. In space infrastructure, this is a big trend. As big as railroads were in the 1800s, as big as highways were in the mid-1900s. As big as the internet was in the late 1900s. This is the infrastructure build of the 21st century. And infrastructure builds, they create enormous wealth for patient investors who get in early and stay committed. So don't ignore what's happening 300 miles above your head. Don't dismiss those satellites as someone else's problem or someone else's opportunity. This affects everyone. This will touch every part of the economy eventually. And the investors who recognize that now, who position themselves thoughtfully and patiently, they're going to be very glad they did 10, 20 years from now. SpaceX moving 4,400 satellites isn't just a headline. It's a signal that we're in the early days of something transformative, something historic. And if you're smart, if you're patient, if you do your homework, you can build significant wealth from this opportunity. I truly believe that, and I hope you'll consider it. Study it, invest wisely, and enjoy the ride, because this is going to be one hell of an interesting few decades in space. Thank you for listening. Now go do your homework on space infrastructure. There's money to be made up there if you know where to look.